Welcome. You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast, the show that cuts through the fog of war and updates you about the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts.
Hello, I'm Marina Yevshan, your host of the Russia-Ukraine War Report podcast, and today is September the 4th, 2024. It has been 3,873 days since Russia started covert military operations in Crimea, 10 years and 196 days since the start of the Russia-Ukraine war, 2 years and 193 days since Russia expanded its war of aggression, and 30 days since Ukraine counter-invaded Russia. Today's podcast covers the events that happened on Friday through this morning after coming back from the United States Labor Day holiday. You will find the Russia-Ukraine war map helpful to visualize the areas discussed. There is a link in the podcast description. There are a lot of map updates today. The Russia-Ukraine war report is compiled by our team from around the world. Today's report includes information from our direct contacts and journalists in Ukraine, the Russian Ministry of Defense, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine morning reports, operational commands north, south, and east of Ukraine, open source intelligence, our in-house team of analysts and geospatial experts, and pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian mail bloggers and social media channels with a track record of trying to be accurate. We have one mission, the truth, because the truth matters. Here is my daily assessment. 1. Autocrat Vladimir Putin's order to recapture the Kursk region of Russia by October the 1st is unrealistic without redeploying additional assets from Ukraine. 2. Russia will maintain its attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, continuing Russian crimes against humanity that started in October 2022, as outlined in 4 arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. 3. The continued attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure are increasing the possibility of an accident at one or more of Ukraine's nuclear power plants caused by the permanent loss of external power connections. 4. We maintain the unwillingness of the Biden administration to permit Ukraine to use provided weapons for strikes more than 40 kilometers from the 1991 state border with Russia has forced Ukraine to develop its own deep strike capabilities, proving that escalation threats from Moscow are hollow. 5. The policy of escalation management implemented by the NATO alliance and the United States, and to a small extent Germany, is a complete failure that only encourages Russian acts of aggression, including more frequent and deeper violations of NATO alliance airspace and acts of espionage in Europe and North America. 6. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia has decided to ignore Ukraine's Kursk offensive and commit all available combat power in the Toretsk, New York, and Pokrovsk areas of operation. This is the last day for this entry. 7. Despite the new increase in operational tempo, we maintain Russia has no strategic reserve available to mount an effective defense of the Kursk region, continues to suffer unsustainable losses, and has committed almost all of its available conventional forces in Ukraine. 8. We maintain the Kursk counter-invasion is strategically sound, despite Ukrainian forces lacking the resources to defend New York and Toretsk and the approaches to Pokrovsk and Selidove. 9. We maintain that Russia will achieve the operational goal of capturing New York and Toretsk in 2024. And we further assess that for Ukrainian forces, an extended battle in an urban environment is ill-advised. 10. In our assessment, the risk of an attack on Ukraine by the armed forces of Belarus is low. 11. The Russian economy is weaker than reported. 12. Persistent delays in the delivery of promised military hardware, munitions, and funding continue to prevent the Ukrainian armed forces from reaching their full combat potential. 13. We maintain the world is caught in the mutually assured destruction instability paradox. Since Saturday, Russia has continued the largest drone and missile attack on Ukraine since February 2022 without a pause. Between the 31st of August and this morning, Russia launched 150 Shahed-136 one-way drones and 56 missiles at Ukraine. Almost all of the missiles and drones targeted civilians and civilian infrastructure. This is in addition to the multiple airstrikes by the VKS, that's the Russian Aerospace Forces, that targeted civilians. On Friday morning, just as the script was sent to me, the VKS bombed a 12-story apartment building in Kharkiv with UMP-30 assisted glide bombs. 97 people were injured and 7 killed, including 14-year-old Sofia Gliniana, who was sitting on a park bench by a playground and was decapitated by shrapnel. A security camera captured the strike that killed the teen. Sofia was starting the 9th grade at Kupiansk Lyceum No. 1 and wanted to be a psychologist. Her father is currently missing in action on the Donetsk front in eastern Ukraine. Another video captured the last moments of a woman who was trapped in her burning 10th-floor apartment, her arm waving out of the black smoke pouring from the blown-out windows. Her son, a member of the Armed Forces of Ukraine who was in Kharkiv, rushed to the building when he heard of the attack and was forced to watch helplessly. A rapid DNA test confirmed the woman was the man's mother. The bombing also killed 18-year-old artist Veronika Kožuško. During his evening address, the President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said, quote, "We need strong solutions from our partners to stop this terror. This is an absolutely fair need, and there is no rational reason to limit Ukraine in defense. We need long-range capabilities. We need the implementation of agreements on air defense for Ukraine." On Saturday, the VKS bombed Cherkasska Lozova in the Kharkiv Oblast, killing 2 and wounding 10, including 2 children. On Sunday, at least 10 short-range ballistic missiles and glide bombs struck the city center of Kharkiv, targeting the Kharkiv Sports Palace, a supermarket, and a metro station being used as a bomb shelter. The attack left 44 people wounded, including 7 children. On Monday, an attack on Kyiv wounded 2 people and severely damaged the boiler house at a school and other non-residential buildings. On the same day, 2 people were killed, including an 8-year-old boy, and 2 more were injured, including a 12-year-old girl, in the city of Zaporizhzhia. Yesterday, Russian missiles struck the Institute of Communications building for the Armed Forces of Ukraine and an adjacent hospital in Poltava. Occupants were moving to bomb shelters when the first impact happened. At the time of recording, 53 were confirmed dead, 271 wounded, and many are still missing in the debris.
Тримайся! Тримайся! Тримайся, ти молодець!
A video showed the moment the first medics arrived, who found a civilian woman with severe chest injuries and a man who had lost one of his legs below the knee. This morning, 2 Kh-47 M2 Kinzhal missiles struck the historic center of Lviv, intentionally targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. At least 7 people were killed and 47 wounded, including 5 children, with 11 in critical condition. 50 residential buildings, 2 medical facilities, including a birthing center, and 2 schools were damaged or destroyed in the attack. While medics were working on stabilizing a man, the body of one of his family members was removed from the building as he watched. Later, firefighters found the body of his 9-year-old daughter in the collapsed building. Bazilevich family now consists only of one person, Father Yaroslav. His wife Yevgenia and 3 daughters, Yarina, Darina and Emilia, were killed by Russian attack. Another missile struck civilian infrastructure and a hotel in Kryvyi Rih, severely damaging 10 apartment buildings, 4 schools and a pharmacy. Search and rescue operations are ongoing, with at least 5 people wounded, 4 pensioners, and a 10-year-old who is in hospital. That's not all of the attacks on civilians. There is more later in the report. Moving to the action report summary. From Friday to Tuesday, Russia carried out 968 discrete assaults, including 207 on Tuesday, the second largest number ever recorded in a single day. Through September the 3rd, the 7-day moving average for daily attacks hit a new record of 197. Russian troops are carrying out 33% more attacks than the previous peak set on July the 4th. The table for Russian versus Ukrainian equipment losses was updated using information from the Oryx database through September the 3rd. We don't go through the details in the podcast, but subscribers get access to our situation reports, and there is more information in the podcast description. Let's go into the details of what happened on the battlefield. This would be a good time to open up the war map on a second device and find the city of Sumy. That's in the northeastern part of Ukraine. There is a link to the map in the podcast description. Ready? Here we go. We start in the Kursk region of Russia, in the Glushkovsky area of operation, or AO. Ukrainian Special Operation Forces targeted Russian troops in southern Krasnooktyabrsk with brimstone missiles, clarifying the village is under Russian control. The Russian pontoon bridge in northeast Zvanya and a tower-mounted surveillance system in the southern part of the settlement were destroyed. Additionally, the pontoon bridge north of Kabylki was destroyed, and a new one was built on August the 31st north of Glushkova. Best of the best available intelligence, that's the only functional bridge into the Glushkovsky district of the Kursk Oblast. Ukrainian drones continued to interdict Russian supply logistics in the settlement and on the Glushkova-Rylsk road, and in Rylsk, a Ukrainian drone struck the electrical substation. In the Korenevo AO, the Russian Ministry of Defense, or Armored, reported that Ukrainian troop positions in Krasnooktyabrsk were attacked by artillery and the VKS, and fighting continued in Komarovka. Fighting continued in the Korenevo area, where Russian forces advanced from the north through part of Nikipelovka and pushed Ukrainian forces out of the village. Based on the new information, we moved Tolpina and Gavrilovka out of the grey area. There is significant evidence that fighting has continued north of Nikipelovka along the railroad grade. Near Labanovka, Russian troops at the railroad bridge over the Krepna River were attacked by drones. Significant fighting continued near the 367th kilometer place train station and Alexandrovka. Armored claimed, without evidence, that fighting continued in Lgovka. There were no reports of fighting in or near Krymiana from any source. On September the 2nd, there were potential combat-related fires on the eastern edge of the village. Satellite images suggested that intense fighting had moved northeast to Kalinov and into southern Sheptuchovka. The current information strongly suggests that Russian forces withdrew from Krymiana, but without 3 independent reports or pictures, we can't make a final assessment. In the Lgov operational direction, or OD, geospatial intelligence indicated that there was significant fighting on the approaches to western Sheptuchovka in the area of the hospital. The chaotic artillery scars are consistent with Russian activity, but there isn't enough intelligence to change the map. Ukrainian sources confirmed that Russia has withdrawn from Malaya Loknya and all the villages to Pogribki. Reinforcing the claim, Armored reported that Malaya Loknya and Orlovka were shelled and claimed there was fighting in the area of Marievka and Kamyshevka. We analyzed satellite images that showed from August the 21st to September the 2nd, fighting moved up to 6 kilometers east of Pogribki to the Kireevka-Yuzhny road. The intelligence aligns with the August 29th claim by Russian mail blogger 2 majors of fighting in the area of Kamyshevka and Kireevka. We link to the satellite images and our analysis in the situation report, and it's also on our Twitter. Russian mail blogger Roman Sapanyakov reported that the rapidly assembled Kursk self-defense forces, comprised of mobilized civilians, became convinced that Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance groups, also known as DRG, had broken through to the Kursk-Lgov highway and started shooting randomly at vehicle traffic, causing multiple friendly fire incidents with Russian troops. Quote, "Before this trip, I was 100% sure that the territorial defense needed to be armed. Now I'm not so sure. These are completely morally unprepared, unstable people." The incident happened just a day after Russian leaders created the armed volunteer groups to maintain civil order in evacuated areas and prevent looting. In the Большое Солдатское AO, north of Russian-occupied Pushkarnaya, multiple videos from Chechen Akhmat showed that Ukrainian forces advanced east from Martynovka and crossed the Mirny Большое Солдатское road. Russian troops in Pushkarnaya are under significant pressure from 3 directions. The same advance from Martynovka is also pressuring Kruglik, if it has a Russian presence. Armad reported that Ukrainian positions in Mikhailovka and Martynovka were shelled. In the Sumy Oblast of Ukraine, 3 Smerch rockets with cluster munitions or Iskander MSRBMs attacked a convoy of up to 20 Ukrainian grain haulers near Verkhnya Syrovatka, 34 kilometers from the Russian border. 1 farmer was killed and 4 more were injured, with multiple vehicles damaged. Of course, Armad claimed the trucks carrying soy were part of a military convoy. On Sunday, in the city of Sumy, an SRBM struck a psychological rehabilitation center and orphanage located in a residential area. The attack, a war crime, wounded 18, including 6 children. On Monday night, the VKS dropped glide bombs on Sumy State University, causing major damage to one of the buildings and injuring a 64-year-old security guard. Vasyl Karpusha, the rector of the university, told reporters, quote, "If you look right there, there's a wrestling gym downstairs. There are departments there, including the field of economics. It's an absolutely civilian educational building." In Kurchatov, a video, and yes, we link to it in the situation report, showed that Russian troops were using school children as human shields, turning a classroom into their barracks and drinking alcohol while students were being taught in the next room. And think about this. If this is how they treat their own, what is happening in the occupied territories? A Russian soldier admitted to human rights violations and war crimes while complaining that civilians in the Kursk and Belgorod regions were unsupportive. Quote, "You don't sell your water to soldiers because you're afraid that if they come, then you'll get hit. You must house them and treat them like your children, feed them, give water, warm up, and protect them. If a soldier comes to your house and says this will be a strong point, then grab your stuff and leave for your relatives. You'll feed the enemy even when you're not asked for help. You're enemy spies, you're not even human." Let me stop here for one moment. Isn't it the responsibility of the Ministry of Defense and the Kremlin to provide drinking water, rations, and housing to their soldiers? Why is it that the local population is afraid of Russian troops, but, as he accuses, are willing to help Ukrainian forces? Could it be the demands to give you water, food, a bed, fuel, and for civilians to get out of their own houses? They're always so close to figuring it out, and yet so far away. Reinforcing why Russian civilians fear their own troops, new videos were shared by shop owners showing how Chechen Ahmad continued to loot stores and Russian troops recorded themselves stealing cars. The spokesperson for the Ukrainian Siversk Operational Tactical Group, Vadim Mysnik, said that Russia continues to refuse to create a green corridor for their citizens who want to leave the occupied territories. Quote, "Local residents are saying they want peace, that they are apolitical, and they just want the conflict to end or to be given a safe corridor to leave the combat zone." The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is upset by the steady stream of Western journalists touring occupied Kursk Oblast. The Russian Embassy of the United Kingdom released a statement on Twitter declaring, quote, "The once respected The Times published a report by Catherine Philp from Russia's town of Sudzha. She arrived there in the company of marauding Ukrainian troops. In doing so, she flagrantly violated the norms regulating the activities of foreign journalists within our territory." The statement continued using the usual Russian talking points, finally declaring, quote, "Obviously, Catherine Philp will be banned from entering Russia." I'm sure she is devastated by this news. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky said that Russia has now transferred 60,000 troops from the Ukrainian theater to the Kursk region. Speaking with the United States news agency NBC News, Zelensky said that Kyiv now intends to hold the occupied Russian territories indefinitely. He also said that holding this territory is an integral part of the, quote, "victory plan." Welcome, new residents of the Kursk People's Republic.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/Malcontent News.
Let's not forget about my home. Here is what happened in Ukraine, starting in the Kharkiv Oblast. In the Liptsi-Vovchansk AO, significant fighting was limited to Vovchansk, where the line of conflict has become static. In the Kupiansk AO, fighting continued in the area of Sinkivka. Ukrainian forces were visually confirmed just west of Tabayevka, and the north flank of the Russian Peshchana salient was reduced. It's small, but it is good news. Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Glushkovsky and Lozova ended in failure, as did an attempt to occupy the southern part of Berestova. Ukraine has introduced a new drone that can deliver thermite, an incendiary weapon, over an extended area. The use of the new weapon system has been observed twice, including in the Kharkiv region. Over the weekend, in the Luhansk Oblast, west of occupied Svatova, elements of the Russian 4th Tank Division occupied most of Stelmakhivka, raising a flag in the northern part of the village. Fighting continued with Ukrainian forces trying to regain lost positions. Further south, Russian attempts to advance in the direction of Grekivka and Druzhelubivka were unsuccessful. West of Kremenna, Russian forces carried out over 25 attacks in Makiyivka and the direction of Nevsky and Novosadove. There were no changes to the situation. Now, let's talk about the Donbass, where we start in the northeastern part of the Donetsk Oblast. Beginning in the Siversk AO, Russian light infantry advanced into the hills northeast of Bilogorivka in an area that neither combatant has been able to control over the long term. Russian attacks west of occupied Zolotarivka, in central Spirne and south of Ivanodaryevka were unsuccessful. In the Kostiantynivka AO, fighting continued on the western edge of the canal district of Chasiv Yar and in areas of Klishchiivka, Andriivka and Kurdyumivka. Small groups of Russian troops occasionally cross the Siversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal into Chasiv Yar and near Kalinivka, but cannot consolidate their gains. Russians converted the heavy equipment repair building next to the Metallurgist Stadium in occupied Bakhmut into an ammunition depot, which was destroyed by a Ukrainian attack. It was made possible by a Russian soldier who broke operational security and filmed the inside of the building. We are reluctant to assess that Ukrainian forces have stabilized the situation in the Toretsk-New York AO. Still, the situation has not only remained stable for over a week, Ukrainian forces have made some small gains. Fighting continued in Druzhba, Pivnichne, the eastern edges of Toretsk in the apartment blocks northeast of the hospital, and in western Zalizne. There have been no significant changes to the line of conflict. East of New York, a geolocated Russian video showed a drone strike on a Ukrainian bunker much further southeast than previously known. Based on the new intelligence, we adjusted the line of conflict and reduced the gray area. Russian troops continued their attempts to advance in the direction of Nelipivka without success. In southwestern Donetsk Oblast, we begin in the Pokrovsk AO. The situation is far from stable, but Russian advances toward Pokrovsk have been stopped. Russian attacks are increasingly frontal assaults by light infantry with limited armor and artillery support. Ukraine has deployed reinforcements and is trying to consolidate on a new defensive line. While Russia is launching a record number of attacks with the largest troop deployment of the war, the combat potential of the force is reduced due to a lack of force multipliers. At least in the short term, it is helping Ukraine slow down the Russian advances. Russian assaults in the direction of Zelene Pole, Vozdvizhenka, Myrolubivka, Krasny Yar, and deeper into Grodivka were contained. Ukrainian forces were not pushed out of Novogrodivka, continuing to hold the northern part of the settlement and attacking the Russian flank. Russian forces were unable to consolidate their gains in Marinivka and were pushed back in the direction of Mykolaiivka. The situation is more difficult in Mikhailivka, where some of the heaviest fighting in Ukraine is ongoing. There is no evidence that Russian forces have consolidated new positions within Selidove. Over the extended weekend in the Kurakhove AO, Russian forces occupied Dolinivka and most of Galitsinivka, including crossing the Vovcha River in the western part of the settlement. Russian attempts to advance toward Ukrainsk, Lisivka and Zhelanne Pershe were repulsed. The Russian attempts to advance in the direction of all three are meant to force a Ukrainian withdrawal from Nevelske, which is protecting the Ukrainian defense of Krasnohorivka along the Lozova River. A video we link to shows a Russian armored assault on the southwestern edge of Krasnohorivka near the ponds ended in failure, with Russian forces suffering significant losses. Russian forces also suffered catastrophic losses in another attempted armored assault in Georgiivka in the direction of Maximilianivka. All 10 armored vehicles were destroyed by artillery, drones and anti-tank guided missiles, confirming that Ukrainian forces were still occupying the region between the two settlements. Russian dismounts, fleeing disabled armored vehicles, tried to hide in the ruins of buildings and were eliminated by artillery and drones. And yes, we link to that video too. There's more information in the podcast description. Fighting continued in Kostiantynivka with no significant changes to the situation. In the Vuhledar AO, the situation deteriorated significantly. Russian forces advanced up to 1,300 meters, reaching the Pivdenno-Donbaska coal mine No. 1 complex northeast of Vuhledar, where heavy fighting was ongoing. West of Vuhledar, Russian forces broke through Ukrainian defenses at Novomayorske and reached Prachistevka. Russian forces also attempted to advance out of occupied Pavlivka, but were unsuccessful. The International Atomic Energy Agency released an update about the situation at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, announcing that the agency would, quote, further expand its assistance to Ukraine by taking a more proactive stance to protect the status of vital energy infrastructure to ensure it does not impact nuclear safety. On Monday, Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy grid disconnected the 330 kV external power connection to the NPP, leaving only a single 750 kV connection. IAEA experts will travel to Ukrainian electrical substations and switchyards across the country that have been damaged by Russian attacks and were identified as, quote, essential for nuclear safety. Director General Rafael Grossi and President Zelensky agreed that Russian missile attacks have, quote, directly caused the disconnection of several nuclear power reactors or led to dangerous instability of the national grid, with Grossi calling the current situation, quote, increasingly vulnerable and potentially even dangerous. While the position of the IAEA is long overdue, Grossi's statement did not indicate there would be concrete steps taken, adding that they will assess the status of the damaged equipment and, quote, the situation at these sites and report back to headquarters for possible follow-up actions. On the 26th of August, Russia targeted Ukraine's electrical infrastructure, causing major fluctuations in the power supply and led to the temporary shutdown or disconnection of reactor units at the Rivne and Yuzhno-Ukrainsk nuclear power plants. The attack also impacted external power at Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant and Chernobyl. Later this week, Director General Grossi will be traveling to the NPP for the fifth time since September 1, 2022. The current inspection team at the NPP continues to have access blocked to parts of the facility, including the western parts of all of the reactor units. We're going back to Russia to talk about areas outside of the Kursk Oblast. On the 31st of August, Ukraine launched 158 drones toward Russia, many targeting the Moscow area. At least one drone struck the Kashira thermal power plant in the Moscow Oblast, but only caused minor damage. 2 drones struck the Gazprom Neft Moscow refinery, causing moderate damage to crude distillation unit 6. Russian officials said the plant would be offline for 5 to 6 days. In the Tver region, at least 2 drones struck the Konakovska State District power plant in Konakovo, causing significant damage to the natural gas processing unit adjacent to the turbine deck. The fire burned for hours, and the blast caused minor damage to the turbine hull.
You're listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War Podcast. Our team of journalists, researchers, and analysts is funded by readers, listeners, and viewers just like you. To support independent journalism, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us on patreon.com/Malcontent News.
Here is my theater-wide update. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Dmytro Kuleba, submitted his resignation as part of an ongoing reset of President Zelensky's cabinet. His resignation comes hours after the Minister of Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, Irina Vereshchuk, and the Minister of Strategic Industries, Oleksandr Kamyshin, also resigned. Over the weekend, President Zelensky dismissed the commander of the Ukrainian Air Force, General Mykola Oleshchuk. Minister of Defense Rustem Umerov said that the removal was not related to the loss of an F-16 on August 26th. Lieutenant General Anatoly Krivonoshko, a pilot, has been named the acting commander. Umerov traveled to Washington, D.C. over the weekend and hand-delivered a list of priority Russian military targets to his U.S. counterpart, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. Ukraine has repeatedly appealed for permission to use ATACMS, Storm Shadow and Scalp-E missiles to strike within the 1991 borders of Russia. In amazing news, it's been 3 days since the list was given to the Pentagon, and it hasn't been leaked to the New York Times, Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal, at least not yet. The European Union has made no progress on creating their framework to provide Ukraine with $50 billion in funding backed by frozen Russian assets, despite pledging to release the funds more than 2 months ago. After arriving at the White House on Monday night, US President Joe Biden was asked by journalist Alex Raufoglu, quote, "Mr. President, on Ukraine, have you seen the latest request to lift restrictions on American weapons so that they can fight back on Russian bases?" After a pause, a frustrated-looking Biden said, quote, "I have made it clear what we support and don't support." The spokesperson for the Pentagon, John Kirby, told reporters that Washington was working on announcing another military aid package to Ukraine, quote, "in a few weeks." Ukraine has not received large-caliber ammunition or ATACMS missiles from the US since June. After pledging to provide sustainment and support for Ukraine's F-16s, the Biden administration, led by the National Security Council, decided that sending contractors to Ukraine was, quote, "too risky," and now hopes, quote, "that European countries will take on more or perhaps all of the responsibilities for maintaining the F-16s. In February 2024, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force Andrew Hunter pledged that the US would provide the sustainment for Ukraine's F-16s. We'll link to the video. The Ministry of Defense of Romania submitted a bill to Parliament to authorize the transfer of a Patriot air defense system to Ukraine, almost 2 months after it was pledged. Parliament rushed the draft law through approval, and it is now awaiting the signature of President Klaus Iohannis. The United Kingdom announced it signed a $392 million contract to provide 120,000 artillery shells to Ukraine over 18 months, starting at the end of 2024. The caliber of the ammunition and the source was not announced. And finally, Bulgaria quietly provided Ukraine with an unknown number of 2 S-1 122mm self-propelled howitzers. And that's what we know. Your support of my home, Ukraine, helps us make history and protect the future for all.
You've been listening to the Malcontent News Russia-Ukraine War podcast. To help keep us independent, please consider providing financial support by becoming a patron. Want on-demand news in your hand? Download the Google News app and make Malcontent News one of your favorites to receive breaking news updates. Thank you for listening.